I present to you Mr. John Grisham.
Thank you, Dean Murchison, for those kind remarks, and thank you, President Ruscio, and the members of the board, the students, the faculty, and parents for this invitation. It's an honor for me to be here today to take part in this wonderful occasion on this beautiful old historic campus. I'm honored to be here and also a little bit surprised to be invited. In the past 18 years, I have written a lot of stories about a lot of lawyers, very few of whom would be classified as models of ethical responsibility. I've been kind of tough on lawyers, and I've had a lot of fun at the expense of the legal profession. And I've been soundly criticized for this by persons far smarter than me, especially in legal circles. A few years ago, one book reviewer / legal scholar, in the midst of a very unpleasant review of one of my books, suggested I should be disbarred for my dismal portrayal of lawyers, and even worse, my shameless exploitation of the legal profession for crass commercial gain. I thought that was a pretty good sentence. I wrote him a letter, something I rarely do, and I informed him that my law license had already been surrendered, but that if I still had it, I might consider using it to sue him for more crass commercial gain. It was one of those letters I really needed to write, but I probably should not have mailed. A couple of years later, he wrote a book, his first novel about lawyers, and I had a chance to review it, and it did not sell very well. Nonetheless, regardless of what's been said about me and how I feel about lawyers, I still consider myself to be a lawyer. My son just finished his first year of law school at Ole Miss, and I'm very proud of him. And I still consider it to be a calling of the highest order. Now, I don't like commencement speeches who give speakers who give a lot of advice because people don't follow it, so I'm not going to do that, but I will say this. My best professor in law school taught me many things. The only thing I remember was when he said, when it comes to opening statements, closing arguments, appellate arguments, sermons, speeches, whatever, if you can't do it in less than 20 minutes, then you're not getting it done. And I have followed that religiously for years, so don't worry, we're almost finished. I finished law school in 1981, a ceremony very similar to this. My commencement speaker was an old man who was very dry and humorless, and for some reason, he spent a lot of time convincing us that we were not really needed. It was 1981. He said the profession was terribly overcrowded, and he buried us with the ugly facts. Almost 1 million lawyers loose on society, more lawyers per capita than any civilized nation could possibly bear, and more lawsuits filed per capita than the earth could possibly stand. All these ugly facts, and he really just sort of, I don't know why he picked that topic for that day, but it was, it really put a damper on my commencement ceremony. But the truth is, we believe that, we bought into that. We had heard that so many times. You've heard it too. I heard it when I started law school and when I finished. I practiced law for only 10 years, and at times I saw evidence that there were probably too many of us. And 20 years ago, when I stopped practicing law, or 18, 19 years ago, I probably would have gone along with the conventional wisdom that, yeah, we don't need any more lawyers. We see these gloomy forecasts of shortages of doctors and nurses and teachers and scientists and engineers. But lawyers? I mean, I haven't seen anybody saying we're going to run out of lawyers. And so I think the question today is still a fair one. Are you really needed? We have more law schools today, more law students, more lawyers, and more lawsuits. Are you really needed? When I started writing books 20 years ago, I began this fascinating journey that has taken me places I never dreamed I would go. One of the wonderful things about being a writer is that you can go anywhere, pick a topic, do the research, and the doors are almost always open. Somebody's going to talk to you. I've been to some very nice places. I've also been to places I never thought about going. I've been to death row in several states, and there I've talked to condemned men who were ready to get it over with, others who were still fighting, all of them very different from the men they were when they got there. I've talked to some innocent men on death row, men who were later exonerated. I've been to a number of prisons. I don't really like to go to prisons, but sometimes I have to for the research. A wide range of facilities, from the big, strong federal maximum security units where after 30 minutes of seeing some of the inmates, I said, thank God we have these facilities, to the federal camps, my favorite. The federal camps, these very expensive, nicer than most public schools, with no fences, no walls, no security, and no good reason for anybody to be there. But housed away, nonviolent criminals housed away at tremendous expense. I spent time in Oklahoma 2 years ago with a young man who has been in prison for 23 years. He was sent there when he was 22 for a murder he could not have possibly committed. He was railroaded in a small town in Oklahoma for a rape and murder and sent away. 23 years he's been in prison. His appeals have run. There's no DNA. There's no lawyer on the outside working on his case. There's no lawyer who believes in his case. It is impossible to describe his anguish and suffering. He'll die in prison, an innocent man. I've been to homeless shelters and soup kitchens and centers for victims of domestic violence, insane asylums, county jails, legal aid clinics, squatters' villages where migrant workers live illegally, juvenile detention centers, even a tent city set up for the neglected victims of Hurricane Katrina. And this journey, I hope it's not over. I'm probably about halfway through. But it's led me to the conclusion after 20 years that not only are you needed, but you are very, very necessary. Now, you may not be needed in a big corporate law firm with 1,000 others and an endless supply of labor. You may not be needed in a small town where the lawyers are stacked door to door. But there are a lot of people out there who need your help. Who are they and where are they? Let me give you a few examples. In 1982, in Culpeper, Virginia, a man by the name of Earl Washington was wrongfully convicted of a rape and murder and sent to death row. He came within 9 days of being executed. His appeals ran. His case was picked up by the Innocence Project in New York. DNA testing finally proved him to be completely innocent. After 19 years in our prisons, Earl walked out. In 1982, a man named Marvin Anderson was wrongfully convicted in Henrico County for rape. He spent 15 years in our prisons before DNA proved him innocent. In 1984, a man named Ed Honecker was wrongfully convicted of rape in Roanoke. He spent 10 years in our prisons before DNA proved him to be innocent. In 1985, a man named Tony Sanders was convicted of rape wrongfully in Alexandria, Virginia. He spent 7 years in our prisons before DNA testing proved him to be innocent. In 1989, a man named Troy Webb was wrongfully convicted of rape in Virginia Beach. He spent 7 years in our prisons before DNA testing proved him to be completely innocent.